Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for joining me on the channel today. I'm Ted Yacucci. Well, I'd like you to pretend that it's September 27th, 1964, and a pretty momentous thing happened on that day. The Warren Commission report was finally released, just under a year after President Kennedy had been shot down in Dealey Plaza in Dallas. Now, one of the reasons that it was so momentous is that the American people had a chance for the first time to really understand the JFK assassination, at least as far as what that commission was willing to give them as far as accurate and true information in the Warren Commission report. But almost immediately, there were a lot of people who tried to read through that voluminous report and realized that, everything wasn't exactly as it seemed. And there were a lot of questions that certainly didn't seem to be answered within the Warren Commission report. And it also seemed like there was a lot of questions and materials that had been left out to people who were really in the know. Well, one of the people who was definitely in the know was a woman named Mary Pinchot Meyer. Now, Meyer had been married to Cord Meyer, who was exceedingly high up in the CIA. As a matter of fact, in 1962, he had become the head of covert action, which was the division within the CIA responsible for assassinations and the removal of heads of state, even of democratically elected countries around the world, in which they were very, very good. Now, nobody knew it at the time, but they were also operating with impunity in the United States. They were assassinating actual citizens of the United States. They had started programs like MK Ultra. We've talked about it many times, their foray into mind control. They had basically overridden their charter to not operate domestically because they had no oversight. And of course, one of the main reasons they were able to get away with this was because of another of their operations called Operation Mockingbird, in which they implanted CIA agents or recruited members of media to do their bidding. So at one point, they had over 3,000 paid associates as part of Operation Mockingbird. The CIA basically was controlling exactly what every American saw and read when it came to the CIA's operations around the world. Now, the one thing you have to know about the CIA is generally it was a community within itself, and most of them lived in the same section, Georgetown, Washington, D.C. Now, the CIA at that time was comprised, especially the upper echelons of the CIA, was really comprised of Northeastern establishment family children. So, in other words, a lot of the children of very wealthy industrialists would go to boarding schools in New England, and that was the prime recruiting ground for the CIA. The CIA initially having been started as the Office of Strategic Services in World War II, and then, of course, it got chartered under President Truman to become the CIA in 1947 and 1948. So, it's really important to understand that because Mary Pinchot, later to become Mary Pinchot Meyer, was right in the middle of this cabal of socially similar people. Okay. She even knew John Kennedy during their college days, even though she didn't go to the same colleges, same universities as he did. Everybody kind of knew each other. And they were all, again, in boarding schools. So they really, in my opinion, lacked a lot of parental oversight at a really important time during those early high school years. And yeah, I'll get into a little bit about that maybe a little bit later. But the point is that when a lot of people have trouble understanding how secrets can be kept, or secrets could have been kept about the JFK assassination. One of the things you don't understand is that these people they weren't just working together. They were living together. They were interacting together. They socialized with each other. They had dinners and parties every weekend in Georgetown. And so it was an amalgamous mass of the same type of people. And unfortunately, it was led by two, in my opinion, by two of the most immoral people that ever walked the earth. And that was Alan Dulles and James Angleton. And Mary Pinchot was someone who was right in the middle of all this as one of the wives of the CIA's covert action leader, Cord Myers. Well, he wasn't that at the time they were married. They had gotten divorced by the time he actually got that title. But he was someone like her who during college and after college, really, and he had served in the World War II very valiantly. He had lost an eye. He was someone that really valued initially peace and the whole idea of peace and progressing forward. But he lost his way, and it's a long story. But he got recruited by the CIA, and he basically became the polar opposite of the person that he had been. He got sucked in so intensely. He was just immersed in that whole Cold War. Well, we can do anything we want to facilitate the progress of our policy. And, and nobody can really say anything. And that was really what it came down to with Alan Dulles and James Angleton. They actually felt like there was no one who could ever control them. They, not the government, not the legislature, not the president, not the Supreme Court, it was they, in their opinion, that really set the policy for a world in which American industry and they personally would be the greatest benefactors. In preparation for this presentation, this video, I reviewed three books that I think are essential in understanding the CIA around the time of the JFK assassination. They are James Douglas's JFK and the Unspeakable, David Talbot's The Devil's Chessboard, and Peter Janning's Mary's Mosaic, which is all about Mary Pinchot Meyer and her life. Now, the first two I recommend, totally without reservation. And Peter Janning's book, while there is so much of value in understanding Mary Pinchot and all of the people that she was associated with, her entire family, all of the families that they interacted with. He does an exquisite job of really explaining how all those social meshings and social interactions really took a toll on each other and how they progressed through life. I have to say, he does make some jumps in the actual murder of Mary Pinchot that I have some questions about, and hopefully I'll get him on and we'll have a discussion with him at some point. But as far as the actual, the again the lives and the motivations behind a lot of people that were in the CIA or families of members of the CIA, again, he does a wonderful job. And so the question really becomes, well, how the heck does Peter Janney really know so much about all of these folks that are so high up in the CIA and just about all of their families and the inner workings and social mechanisms of all of these people? Well, the answer is that he is part of that group. It's amazing. He is the son of Wistar Janney, and he will make the admission in his book, Mary's Mosaic, that he believes his father was involved in the murder of Mary Pinchot. Now, that's incredible. I mean, what that takes such courage to actually come out and make those kind of admissions that your own father was part of this CIA cabal who did some of these really, really horrible things, including the murder of one of their own, Mary Pinchot. Now, as far as the actual murder of Mary Pinchot, in order to get into all of the details, it would take a lot more than the scope of this particular video. And I really suggest you read Mary's Mosaic for all the details that Peter Janney delivers to us about his investigation that took a decade or more. The big things that come out of it were that it was almost a rerun of Dallas in the sense that it was set up by the CIA. He gives admissions by members of the CIA in the course of his book that they were actually responsible. And if you look at it, it follows all of the same trends. We have the murder. And then we have the patsy, a guy named Ray Crump. This whole thing actually went to trial, and Mr. Crump was acquitted. Now, for him to be acquitted in Georgetown, in Washington, D.C., of the murder of Mary Pinchot, that there had to be some real shenanigans going on. And luckily, Mr. Crump had a incredibly great attorney working for him, which, and she was able to really pull out a lot of these inconsistencies. What it really comes down to, guys, is that the way that she was killed with two shots, a shot to the head. She ran, she fought for her life. She grabbed onto a birch tree. She was dragged back to where the CIA wanted her body to be found. And then she was shot a second time, this time right under the clavicle in a way where the bullet went in and to the left, and in a perfect trajectory to destroy her aorta and kill her immediately. And so, the shots were so precise that went a long way. The other thing, of course, there was no real evidence against this guy, Ray Crump, although the CIA did their very, very best to manipulate and manufacture evidence, but it wasn't believed by the jury. The other thing, and this is the big thing, that Peter Janney does for us, and he does it especially in the last rewrite of his book, Mary's Mosaic. He tracks down a guy named Lieutenant William Mitchell. Now, this guy shows up the day after Mary Pinchot's murder on the towpath of the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal Road there. He shows up. He says he's from the Pentagon. He says he was jogging there and he happened to see Mary and he saw this guy, Ray Crump, or a guy that looked like him. Yeah, it just didn't make a whole lot of sense why he would even be jogging in that area, which really wasn't really where you would think he would jog during lunch, compared to logistically to where he worked. Anyway, long story short, over the course of a decade, Peter Janney tracks this guy and realizes that all the stuff that he said in court, that he was all of his military background, that he taught math at Georgetown University, all of this stuff was just a setup. It was baloney. He didn't really do it. And then he just disappeared. So it took a decade for Janney to find this guy. But when he finally did, he actually sued him for the murder of Mary Pinchot. That's amazing, you know? And this guy was at this point on the West Coast. Um, what happened is they were, that's an amazing lawsuit that would be filed there, and it's not really sure that it would ever get to court. But they must have been so worried about it that they told Peter Janney, this is this guy, Lieutenant Mitchell, who of course is in his 70s then and retired, but they agreed to sit down for a deposition if Peter Janney would drop his lawsuit. And Johnny, not really believing that his lawsuit would really make it to court, was more than happy to do that. And then this guy, Lieutenant Mitchell, really does everything that he can, just saying, "Oh, I don't know, I don't remember, I don't know, I don't remember." And it becomes really obvious when you look at the transcripts and you hear Peter Janney's story about this, that this guy really was involved. This guy was a fake witness at the very least. Now, Janney goes further to say that he believes this guy, Lieutenant William Mitchell, was actually involved in the actual murder of Mary Pinchot. That's where I'm not sure that enough evidence is presented in his book, Mary's Mosaic, to make that leap. But without question, this guy was a CIA operative and a fake witness at the trial of this Ray Crump, the guy that they were trying to set up for the murder of Mary Pinchot, when it was obviously a CIA hit. Now, why was it a CIA hit? Why did they want her killed? Well, that's what we're going to explore next. So Mary Pinchot was someone who was very, very popular. She was a beautiful young lady by all accounts, knew a lot of people. And again, there were all the people in the New England kind of boarding school social set tended to know each other because they all kind of interacted family-wise and in social settings, no matter what school they actually went to. So after she marries Cord Meyer, in the beginning, one of the reasons they seemed to get together was they both had this overriding desire to help create world peace. And Cordmeyer, having gone through World War II and suffered devastating injuries to himself, losing an eye, he actually started this worldwide organization that would fight for that, to kind of hold the UN's feet to the fire. The UN had been established, and one of the things he was trying to do was to say, look, it's not going to get anywhere unless there is some oh gosh, what would be the words? Unless there's some rules set in so that countries are actually held to more than just talking about peace, maybe is the best way to say it. But anyway, over the next couple of years, he just seems to lose. Maybe he fought too hard for that, and maybe he just got discouraged, but he just seemed to lose his enthusiasm for the whole thing. And he was then brought into the CIA. He was kind of got into a position where he had to be doing something. He thought the CIA was a good stepping stone for his career. But then he got exposed really, really quickly to all these operations under James Angleton and Alan Dulles and the whole Cold War mentality that we mentioned. And he becomes a different person. He starts doing things that he would never dream of doing earlier, like all of those people in the CIA did. And that was the way that they progressed up into the higher echelons of the CIA. It's brought out in not only Peter Janney's book, but other books. And that's really the problem is that was the way people got ahead. It was like, since there was no oversight, it was just the end goal. If you thought that someone should be overthrown in a different country, it really didn't matter how they got there, who they killed, who they assassinated, what monetary contraptions they came up with, as long as it ended up coming out in their favor. And that was what Cora admired. That was the kind of involvement, the kind of you know indoctrination into that whole type of lifestyle that he fell for. And eventually he and Mary got divorced. And she really kind of kept to, from all accounts, she kept to her desire for world peace. Now, she had a relationship with John Kennedy, and it was more than just a friendship relationship, I believe, because it seems to be confirmed by a lot of sources that she was having some kind of a romantic relationship with John Kennedy while he was president. So she had kind of not only did she have an overwhelming influence because they seemed to really have a connection together, but it just happened at the time that was very, very important in Kennedy's life because he himself was making that change from Cold Warrior to someone who actually was looking way, way higher. And as we can see by his famous American University speech, he really believed in world peace. He really believed in a détente with the Soviet Union. He believed in trying to better relations with Cuba. And he thought that there was a world where everyone could get along and respect each other. What we all would hope for, probably, right? Okay, but when he gets to finally be president, and remember, he had already been to Vietnam, so he had already seen the quagmire that the French were in, but more importantly, he saw what the CIA was doing and how they were trying to manipulate world leaders and world governments and world currencies. And, he made the decision not to send get military involvement in Laos, other than what was already happening at the time that he took over. He said we wouldn't go to war in Laos. And then because he experienced what he experienced with first the Bay of Pigs, where Alan Dulles specifically lied to him about what the operation could achieve and other details about it. And then, of course, he kind of got rid of Alan Dulles, by firing the top three of the echelon of the CIA. But then we had the Cuban Missile Crisis, and we have the CIA actively doing everything they can in an insane effort to make sure that there's war rather than peace in the Cuban Missile Crisis. Everyone in the world for 7 days is so worried about nuclear annihilation, and we have people in the CIA sending raiding parties, three separate raiding parties into Cuba while the Cuban Missile Crisis is proceeding. They're trying to sink Russian shipping in Cuba to make sure that a war actually happens. And they actually suggest to President Kennedy a preemptive nuclear strike on the Soviet Union. If you can believe that, that's how insane some of these people really were. And it sounds like, how could anybody come up with that? But they did. So now we begin to understand what Mary Pinchot was faced with. Having such close, intimate contact with President Kennedy and also being so involved with the CIA community, she was in a perfect position to really gain information about secretive things that almost no one else could have. And she wasn't one to shy away from it. So, as we got close to the JFK assassination, she was seeing things that were really bothering her. And then by the time the assassination had occurred, and for the months after, she was, beside, of course, being, beside herself with grief, she was also so anxious to find out what really happened because she had an idea that it was the CIA that was behind JFK's assassination. So everybody, like the whole world, waited for that Warren Commission report to come out. And when it did come out, Mary Pinchot read it right away. And, this frightened the CIA greatly because they knew some of the secrets that she knew about them. How? Because they had, by all accounts, they had her phone tapped for years. And part of that was because of the relationship she was having with John Kennedy. Of course, the CIA, especially Angleton and Dulles, would want to have all of that information, to be able to use at some future point if they really wanted it. There was also, of course, uh, the the publicity that surrounded the diary that Mary Pinchot had, that James Angleton was seen the very night of the assassination. I'm sorry, the very night of the death of Mary Pinchot. He was supposedly seen at her little studio, um, trying to break in to retrieve the diary, which by all accounts he really did. Okay, so this is the point. The point is that there were so many people that were so worried about the JFK assassination because it's not like it is today where they've gotten away with it for so long. Remember, this was still very, very fresh. They had just performed a coup d'etat in America. They had taken over the government of America. And all of a sudden, here is a woman, coming from basically their own social set that they knew had information that could be very, very dangerous to her. And so, as a matter of fact, her sister went by the nickname Tony. She was actually married to Ben Bradley, the famous, Washington Post newsman from the Watergate era, right? But he was the consummate CIA operative. He was the consummate CIA operative. So he would do whatever they asked, especially at that time. And, he knew that because he was married to Mary Pinchot's sister, he knew how much information Mary Pinchot had on the assassination and the CIA's role in the assassination of President Kennedy. And that's why the decision was made that Mary Pinchot had to go. They actually killed her because of what she knew, or what they thought she knew, about the assassination of President Kennedy and what she would bring to light about it. It's sick, it's sad, and that's what the CIA really was at that time because of a total lack of oversight. One of the things that scares me so much about what we're facing with government today, a total lack of oversight. Unbelievable. We'll get into more of this and maybe how it actually affects how we feel about government today. And more importantly than that, maybe some of the steps that we can all hope are taken in the future so that we can safeguard against some of these agencies or some of these political figures that really try to get rid of the very, very, very necessary oversight rules that any democracy would have to have in place in order to survive. Thank you so much for being with me today, and I look forward to seeing you on our next video.